Rebels in the Democratic Republic of Congo are vowing to march on the capital Kinshasa after making further advances in the east of the country. The Rwandan-backed armed group M23 recently captured most of the eastern provincial capital of Goma. The UN says it's deeply concerned over reports that the group is continuing to advance south.
This video shows what's left of a United Nations peacekeeping camp. The camp was located in one of the last towns to fall before M23 rebels captured Goma, the biggest city in eastern DRC. The rebels now say they aim to seize DRC's capital.
We're here in Goma to stay, as Congolese, and protect the population against the uncivilized. We will continue the liberation march all the way to Kinshasa.
In Goma, the situation is dire. Bodies recovered from the streets. Hospitals have said they're overwhelmed by patients wounded in the fighting.
The current situation is chaotic. In 3 days, we have received more than 400 injured people. In January, we have treated more than 1,000 injured. For a hospital with a capacity of just 146 beds, we currently have more than 200 injured in hospital.
Much of Goma is cut off from electricity and running water, forcing people to fetch their own in Lake Kivu. Civilians say M23 fighters have urged them to reopen their businesses.
We're a bit worried because last time we were here selling our things and suddenly bullets were flying everywhere and we didn't know why.
As the M23 fighters push towards Kinshasa, a humanitarian crisis faces Goma.
Well, for more now, we're joined by DW correspondent Jonas Gadding. He's in the DRC's capital, Kinshasa. Jonas, the M23 rebels say they are on their way to Kinshasa. Could they end up seizing control of the entire country?
Yeah, so we need to take in mind that the country is really huge. The country has round about the size of Western Europe, and territorially speaking, for the moment, they have a rather small territory. But the fall of Goma is really something which is really crucial because the rebels, they have captured lots of materials. There have been mercenaries on the ground. They left their material. And so they captured Congolese soldiers. And so this gave them a lot of strength. And they are now on their way marching towards Bukavu, the capital of the South Kivu province. But it's really hard to say at the moment how this will turn out finally.
So, as you mentioned, the rebels are now in control of Goma. We've been seeing pictures from there. That's a significant city of around 2 million people. Many of the people there are refugees. What's the situation like in Goma now?
Yeah, so in the rebels, they have pretty much taken control of the city, but there might still be some pockets of resistance. So there are still some security issues. There might still be some confrontations. But in general, the situation, humanitarian-wise, is getting better. First routes for food are opened again. Electricity is back in some areas of the city. The UN calls for a reopening of the airport. But we need to take in mind that this is actually the plan of the M23. So they want to install a parallel administration, and the better this works, the more support they expect internationally and locally.
Now, Rwanda, the neighboring country, appears to be supporting the M23 rebels. Is there a risk of this escalating into a wider regional conflict?
They are supporting the rebels, so it's around 3,000 to 4,000 soldiers on the ground. This is what UN documents show. The DRC has often threatened to invade Rwanda, but this is something which doesn't seem very likely at this moment, looking at the weak situation of the army. We need to take a look at Burundi, because Burundi is working with the DRC together to fight rebel groups, other rebel groups in a little bit to the south. Uganda is working with the DRC to fight rebel groups to the north. So we need to see what role they will play. South Africa, for the moment, is really furious because peacekeepers were killed. But I'd say that Rwanda, for the moment, is rather isolated. But their problem is already an international one.
Now, many people, millions of people, are already displaced in the DRC. What impact is the advance of the rebels having on the overall humanitarian situation in the DRC?
We need to take in mind that the conflict is raging for around 30 years in Eastern DRC. We've got more than 120 plus rebel groups, and M23 are just like the strongest of them. And every time they enter new territories, they will be fighting, people fleeing. I'd say the big risk is that there's a kind of power balance between those rebel groups and the army in other areas, and that the whole situation can get uprooted at the moment.
Jonas, thank you very much. That was our correspondent, Jonas Gerding, in Kinshasa.
Now let's bring in Shelley Thackrell of the UN's World Food Programme in the Congolese capital, Kinshasa. Shelley, the UN estimates 500,000 people have been forced from their homes due to the fighting. How is the situation for civilians right now?
Thanks so much. Yeah, I mean, if it was desperate a week ago, and remember this war's been going on for many, many years, it's disastrous now. And you heard in the report about the advancement also beyond Goma, probably into the south. We spoke this morning to somebody who we work with very closely in the community, and she said, I've lived through 2 wars that have literally traumatized me. I don't sleep very well. My mental state is just unbearable. And my heart, and it's a solidarity. She's saying, as somebody who's probably facing at some point where she's going to have to uproot from her home, she's saying that my heart goes out to those people in North Kivu. We urgently need the international community, the world, to really remember us. Don't let us be this forgotten crisis. So from where I'm sitting today in Kinshasa, yes, we're looking at the entire country. We continue to operate, but we need to get urgent supplies. We need there to be safe humanitarian access so we can reach these people.
Now, women and girls are especially at risk. Why is that?
In a conflict, and especially in somewhere like DRC, where, remember, there have been waves of violence over many decades. And what happens in these situations when people have left their home, not once, not twice, but multiple times, they've left their income, they're traveling with small children, their family. And often in some of these camps that are around Goma, very makeshift, probably very little access to firewood. So when they go out into the bush or into nearby forests, they are more vulnerable. When you don't have food, when you are trying to feed your family, when you're trying to survive, unfortunately, you will lean into very negative coping mechanisms. And this is what we see not just in DRC, but in other conflict areas, especially where I've worked across the globe. So this is something that we need to be really, really aware about, and we need to help these women. So in times of peace, we'll be working with women to make sure that they have skills training, that they can run small businesses, that they can do tailoring, they can make soap. But in times of conflict, we need to be really sensitive and really aware of what these communities and what these mothers and what these young children are facing. Yes, it's a humanitarian crisis, but it's also a protection crisis.
Now, from the perspective of an organisation like yours, how difficult is the delivery of aid, given that safety is a major concern?
Absolutely. And at the moment, what we're seeing in the east, and especially around Goma, when you've shut off land and the airspace is closed at the moment because of the airport, water, the lake is also off limits. So you really are trapped. You've got a stranglehold on some of the supply chain. So when we speak to people who are saying, I don't know if I've got enough food in my house, I haven't had clean water, we've seen cases of cholera, Ebola, we've had mpox in the east, measles. So again, it's this tinderbox, and what we want now is safe humanitarian access. We need to get to people, and we need to get to them now, and we need to have that safe passage of access to be able to do that.
Now, safe passage is something, of course, that you need in the short term very quickly. What do you need in the long term?
In the long term, we need for peace. We need a cessation of this violence. I mean, people they're at breaking point. Enough. You know, they can't take this anymore. Who could? You know, who can live this cycle of trauma day in, day out? And you know, people are obviously saying that you know, it's not tomorrow that everything will return to normal, and that's true. You know, there's always you have to sort of rebuild people's lives. So what we're asking for is cessation of violence, is an opportunity for Congolese people to breathe again, to have that right to food, to have that dignity, and for them to be able to restore their own lives and livelihoods.
The World Food Programme's Shelley Thackrell there speaking to us from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Thank you very much, Shelley.